So, Paris, I really do think you're a couple of quick revisions away from being ready to submit this. It's come together really well. I've scribbled some notes on it here, and I'll get them typed up and get them over to you ASAP. Cool.
Cool. I'll get those revisions done as fast as I can, and thanks for taking the time out to look at this stuff. I appreciate it.
No need to thank me. I'm your mentor. It's my job.
How do I get a mentor?
Oh, don't worry. I can mentor you as well.
Really? There's no other tenure librarians? It's just me and you in the library? Just me and you? Really?
Good evening and welcome to For Your Reference, brought to you by your friendly neighborhood librarians here at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. I'm Robin Beedenbow.
I'm Paris Whalen.
And I'm Sarah Johnson.
And I just want to say, y'all, I have enough love to go around, okay?
Oh, goody. Dreams do come true.
And Paris, you do have to remember all of your lessons about sharing, okay?
Oh, nobody likes a lesson, Robin.
Well, I think all of us agree that mentoring is a critical part of the academic process, but I do feel like academics sometimes forget that staff might benefit from it as well. So we tend to focus on tenure track faculty and students, particularly grad students.
Sounds like a growth opportunity to me.
Yeah, for sure.
I think all of us could use someone to help us get through this thing called life. And tonight we have a very special guest with her own perspective on mentoring and a variety of other topics. This is Reviewer 2. I would like to extend a warm welcome to our guest tonight. Dr. Stacey Patton is an award-winning journalist, author, college professor, and nationally recognized child advocate. I could go on, but I'd prefer to let her speak for herself. Welcome, Stacey.
Hi, Robin. It's so good to be here.
I'm so happy to have you here. So why don't we start by having you tell us a little bit about you and your much varied work.
So I, as you said, I'm a college professor. I teach journalism at Howard University. I'm also a research associate at Morgan State University. My academic work focuses on childhood in American history as a construct, looking at the intersections of race and childhood and parenting, corporal punishment, the horrible lynchings of children during Jim Crow. And I'm also a child advocate outside of academia. So I do a lot of work with child welfare professionals, pediatricians, clinicians, law enforcement folks, to talk about things like corporal punishment, juvenile justice issues, racial disparities in education, those sorts of things.
Yeah. So you are very, very busy and doing some very important work. Very important work. Glad you were out there doing that.
Yes.
Now, due to some unforeseen circumstances, the Reviewer 2 that was planned to be here cannot join us tonight. So you and the audience are stuck with me.
That's a good thing.
Now, so let's get to that end. The question you and I are going to be talking around generally is this: what does history teaching, history telling, and academic mentorship need to do right now in our current moment? Before we start, I want to remind everyone in the audience, if you would like to ask a question of our guest, just drop them in the comments on either YouTube or Facebook, and we'll see how many we can get to. Now, if it's okay with you, I'll start us off with a question. We talked a little bit about how this was going to look before this, and you made note that going into grad school, you had some expectations about what your ideal advisor would look like, who that would be, and how did reality sort of differ from what your initial expectations were?
So I was going in to enhance my knowledge about African American history And I had in mind that I had a question in mind that I wanted to understand the historical evolution of corporal punishment in African American culture. And so when I applied to graduate schools, I think I probably applied to a half dozen schools. One of the things I did was I went on department websites to look at the profiles of the professors who were there. I looked at the type of work that they were doing, the books they had written, what their areas of focus were, so that I could make sure that I went to a program where there were people who were versed in these particular fields. And because I'm African American, I thought, oh, I'm going to go to a history program where there's some African American faculty. They surely are the best possible, equipped folks to help me navigate my research process, my growth, my understanding. And so I came into my program thinking, oh, I'll work with these two very well known African American women historians. And I quickly learned that they just weren't the best match. Some of it was personality differences, ideological differences. Some of it had to do with accessibility, because a lot of times when you're Black faculty at predominantly white institutions, you get deluged with having to do all the diversity work, and the undergraduates come to you because you're there, and they just don't always have enough time or energy to nurture graduate students.
Right.
And so I got a lesson from another mentor, another famous African American male historian, who kind of chuckled and he says, "You're going to learn that the best qualified people don't always share the same, physiognomy." That was the word that he used. I had to look that up. Physiognomy as you. It was about who's the best read, who's capable of preparing you to make nuanced arguments, to find new insights, to create a document that has value to the profession, that's going to add value to your marketability beyond your program, and help you do some cutting edge scholarship that speaks across different fields. And so I dumped them. It was a lot of backlash for doing that, because when I was a reporter at the Chronicle of Higher Education, I always did stories about students, grad students particularly, who made that decision and suffered the consequences.
Right. It's a very political sort of thing. I think
Mhm.
people don't realize it, just going, oh, wait, I think it'll be easier to work with this person over here. Like that is seen by a lot of academics as a huge slight. And if you
Mhm. And grad students need to know that they're like pawns in the nastiness and the politics of academe. I had no clue just how mean spirited and sabotaging. Like, you're talking about people with tenure,
right.
people who are full professors, doing these sorts of things to folks. They just get power off of either making or breaking other people's careers, young folks especially.
Right. And I will say I've seen some of that as well. I've also seen, though, that there are people like you, and I think people like myself, who have gone through a process and thought, well, and fall down on the side of, I really hate that I had to suffer through that, and I'm going to make sure nobody else has to do
Yes,
it on my watch.
absolutely. Yes.
Right. So tell us a little about who your advisor ended up being, because that's who was supposed to be with us tonight, and unfortunately she cannot be here. But
Yes. So I had a wonderful advisor, Dr. Virginia Jans from Rutgers history program. She actually started teaching in the program the year I was born. We always had a good laugh about that. You were on the tenure track the year I was born. So she's an immigration scholar, focuses mostly on the experiences of Italians, and does work on Margaret Mead. And so she's well versed in terms of concepts of childhood and anthropology and so on and so forth. And we were an unlikely pair. Here I was concerned about understanding, African American childhood. So at first I'm thinking, what is this white woman going to teach me
Right.
about Black childhood? I know Black childhood better than she does. I was once a Black childhood. I survived Black childhood. She can't tell me anything. But I met up with her in a semester-long seminar on childhood, and it was a cross-disciplinary group of scholars from Rutgers and beyond who met weekly. And I remember giving her my seminar paper, and she read it. And when I got it back, it looked like a crime scene. And I was like, oh my God, I know nothing. And so,
That's the thing, is when you just first start grad school, you don't. And you just need to accept that and accept the sea of red and do what you can to fix it.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
we met and we sat down together side by side, as we would do for the next, 6 years. And she explained every mark, every comment. But it wasn't just like, this is wrong, that's wrong, you don't know anything. What are you doing here? Go back to
Mhm.
journalism. You'll never be a historian. It was, this thing has a lot of potential, and I'm going to show you what works, and I'm going to show you how to make it better. I'm going to show you how to write like a historian, and how to connect the experiences of Black children to this so-called master narrative of American history. And I'm going to show you how to add a lot of nuance. And our relationship began with that. And we evolved into friendship. And I call her the wise woman, and regard her like one of my village moms. um she did more than just mentor me through the dissertation proposal, the oral defense, the actual writing of the dissertation itself. She would show me, like if I needed a letter of recommendation, it wasn't that she would just write this letter for me. She'd say, you're going to have to do these for students in the future. So this is how you do this. This is how you write a job letter. This is how you need to market yourself on this interview. Let me tell you some secrets about what really gets historians all excited for a candidate. So she had a lot of humor,
That's
lots of
awesome.
nurture, and and she just taught me life stuff too.
That's awesome. So you talk about her sort of teaching you how to be a historian, and a thing that historians do is they dig around a lot in the archives, which I know you've spent a lot of time doing, and that differs a little bit from, like, library research that people typically think about as going in and finding articles and databases. From your perspective, what do you feel like the archives have afforded you in terms of storytelling that these other kinds of sources don't?
Well, so I think this is a question about the difference between libraries and archives. Of course, both are excellent resources of information for the public. They
Of course,
serve an important role in that, but they differ in terms of the types of materials that they hold and the way that people can get in and access them. So for me, I've used archives. Um, Archival materials such as manuscripts, letters, photographs, this primary source stuff that's really unique and rare and specialized. And when I've gone into the archives as a storyteller, I've used them as a journalist, as a historian. I find that the people who oversee them are very knowledgeable about these documents. They often give you way more than you ask for. So sometimes when I was in grad school, I would walk into like the Library of Congress or the Schomburg or whatever, and people would look at me like I was No Child Left Behind because I'm very young. And I would ask these guys, like, I need to see the ledgers from the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice. They'd look at me like, what do you need that for, girly? And I'm like, for this dissertation chapter, and they perk up. So they always find me these documents that I wanted, but things that were related. And I was able to get the serendipity of making these synergetic, connection between the files. And so as a storyteller, I use archival records to make sense of the past, the present and these historical echoes that we're living with right now. And so they help us do storytelling with multiple characters, different perspectives, different possibilities. One of the things my advisor Jenny taught me about the archives is that, you got to look for these moments of contingencies, these topsy-turvy relationships, the unusual suspects. And so the archives for me have helped me expand the number of stories, the different kinds of stories that can be told. And for me, that's trying to look for children who don't often leave behind records, but they have these experiences that get recorded in the most low places, pun intended, and add some sort of nuance to how we understand history.
Great. So you do research, you dig around in some pretty dark stuff when you're here in the archives. So thinking about your relationship with Jenny, can you tell us about a time when she really helped you work through maybe some difficult content you encountered and you were maybe struggling with it?
Yeah. So I because of the topics that I look at, which is really about the abuse of children, horrible abuses. And for me, the archives have been a chamber of horrors. And sometimes I'm like, there's no hope here. There are no heroes in this story. We often are told to go into the archives and find resistance, people who fought back. But sometimes it's not there. So I think that I recall gathering old postcards from the late 19th, early 20th century of children. These are cartoon images that continue to circulate in our culture now as Black memorabilia. And I collected hundreds of these things from different sources. And I was just looking at all this awful stuff. And I'm like, this is effed up, right? This is horrible. These people are evil. And so I would call her up and, I'm like, I found this disgusting stuff and, people suck, right? And so, she would allow me to rant, to in very raw terms, describe what I was looking at and how I felt. And it was in that process that, my emotions were overriding my critical thinking about this stuff and clouding my ability to ask historical questions. Like, who are the artists behind these? Who are the companies? Can we go into the archives and look for any written material that explains their motives? How did people in that time understand what they were creating? What questions can we ask? What assumptions can we make? So we would go through that emotional process and then say, okay, now that we've gotten that over there, you can still, she would always say, you have the right to be angry, to call this ugly, to call it racist, but that's not the story. There's nuance and complexity in all of this. And so she pushed me to step away and then come back all the time. Look away, look at it again. Look away again, ask a different set of questions, and you start to see things more kaleidoscopically and nuanced. And so that being able to ask those intellectual questions helps me manage my emotions when I see really dark and ugly things.
So a question we asked of some archaeologists we had on here for the first part of season 2 is, do you have any techniques or tricks? I mean, I think you're a journalist, that this whole idea of objectivity has always been somewhat of a lie. We could do a whole evening on that. Let's just set that over here. But what kinds of techniques or tricks do you use to ensure you're trying to remain as objective as you possibly can in the telling of the stories that you encounter? So you talk about this kaleidoscope, but how do you keep your own sort of stuff out of there? We all bring our own ideologies and our backgrounds, but how do you and I think sometimes maybe our backgrounds and our political ideologies can help us tell that story, but sometimes they can get in the way. Can you talk a little bit about?
You know, it's a tough one. And it's especially tough given the stuff that I see. And given that we're still living with the consequences, these intergenerational inheritances in our current moment. But I try to remember um, the words of another mentor of mine. She's a journalism mentor who just recently passed away. Um, and she would always tell me that, you know, one of the most important lessons that she learned as a storyteller, you know, and she was a writer and an editor. When you go into the archives, you got to be quiet enough to let others speak. Right? You got to be quiet enough to let others speak. And so your job as a historian, your job as a storyteller is to listen. Just listen. What are the documents telling you? What are these people telling you from their own voices, their diaries, their letters, you know, the editorials you're reading in old papers? So your job is to listen to all that. You may not agree with it. I laugh a lot. I like going to the 19th century because everybody was off the chain. They just didn't hold back, in words all over the place, like just ableist language, all the stuff that triggers us today. 19th century, they didn't care, right? So it's like, wow, this is really juicy stuff. So I laugh a lot because it's so ridiculous what people are saying. But our job is to listen and then to amplify and then to synthesize and then to distill. Right. One technique, though, I'm trying, particularly with my next book, because it's so difficult, I need to find a way to invite people to take my hand and come watch the ugly, brutal, evil murders of children. So they need me and my voice and my energy to help them go through that chamber of horrors. So I want to say, Robin, come sit down with me. We're going to go back to some ugly scenes.
Right.
And so I actually have a conversation. So the technique that I'm using to help myself get through this and my readers to get through this is to have a conversation. Well, let me show you this picture. And what do you think? So I'm actually asking questions. So it cuts you know, some of that, you know, tension and emotion. But what I'm seeing far too much happening in the academy, particularly in gender studies, and some, another topics around sexuality and race is too much entrenchment in ideological thinking on things. There's a lot of rigidity. People are bringing their traumas to the archives. Like, you got to check that in the locker somewhere because
Right.
their own personal unresolved stuff is guiding, you know, how they go and they look at, they read things onto the past that aren't there. They put words into people's mouths. That's not what they meant. Right. And so we've got to check our own traumas, our own unresolved stuff, and our own ideological motives sometimes so that we don't distort the historical record.
Right. Thank you. So changing gears just a little bit, because this is a question I had, and you and I have talked a little bit about too. So as a mentor, particularly in 2022, as we're looking at like the nature of the academy, the state of the academy, it's you know, there's this whole alt-ac is this phrase that gets thrown around a lot because people are saying, okay, maybe you want a PhD, but maybe you want to think about what a job outside of academia looks like, because you know, particularly in some disciplines, they're starting to get overrun with PhDs, and there just aren't jobs available. Again, we could go on all night about how there are fewer jobs percentage-wise than there used to be. But do you think, given that, it's more important now than ever for academics to try to have some kind of hand on the pulse, finger on the pulse of what's going on outside?
Absolutely. So, you know, some years ago, I was a reporter for the Chronicle of Higher Education. I covered graduate education, adjunct faculty labor issues, and I was constantly writing about student loan debt, completion to degree, alt act, plan B, those sorts of things. It was really interesting. Here, Jenny comes back into the picture because when I finished at Rutgers, they generally send out a congratulatory note when somebody gets a job. And
Right.
so my advisor said, "Oh, we need to send out a note saying that my student Stacey Patton has landed a job as a reporter covering graduate education at the Chronicle of Higher Ed."
Right.
And so she was told by the chair, "Oh no, that kind of job doesn't count because it's not a tenure track position in
Mm.
history." And she was, smoke coming out the nostrils, doing her Italian hand signals, all that, right? And I was hurt. I was like, wow. So that I just don't count. They're not proud of me for this. And so, I got a little bit of revenge. So I ended up doing a story focused on an American Historical Society. No, the American Historical Association, and what it was doing in terms of having this conversation within the discipline. So I looked at the top 10 graduate programs in history and tried to get them to report how they were tracking PhD outcomes. Where were people getting their jobs? And a lot of the schools were doing a horrible job. And so my piece caught the attention of the AHA, which then said, we've got to pass a policy that talks about tracking where history PhDs end up. And we've got to start having conversations about alt acts, right?
Right.
And so what happened is you had all these boomers who are like, I've been in the academy for 30 years. How can you, that's not my job to, teach, these grad students how to get jobs outside of academia. So given the numbers, right? The shrinking proportion of tenure track positions, ballooning student loan debt, right? I also wrote about the rising numbers of PhDs on welfare. That thing went viral and it was scary. I mean, I saw PhDs, like grown white men, crying because they got a PhD in medieval history and they go into the WIC office because, when they got into grad school, nobody told them about the realities. Like, look, dude, you could
Right.
be poor, smart and poor, right? And and so
Smart, white, male, and poor.
yeah, yep. Dr. Wick, right? That's so bad. So yes, now more than ever, graduate programs need to be transparent. They need to be training students how to be marketable. They need to be having conversations with employers. So how do we use history PhDs in these various industries, in government, in commerce in some sort of way? What are these, different possibilities, right? And so
Because
those
even if you study a very narrow topic in history, that there are some skills that come along with being able to do that kind of storytelling, right?
absolutely. And I think it's totally irresponsible to allow students to come in to graduate programs and do very, very, very narrow things that won't get them a job. That just won't. And, I worked full time while I was in graduate school. So at graduation, folks were like, so what are you doing? I'm like, I'm going to work on Monday, So this idea that, grad students should only like be studying by candlelight, and keeping their head in the archives and not doing other things to make themselves marketable while they're in school is totally irresponsible.
So I have a final question for you tonight. This is kind of a personal question. Okay. You recently had a relationship. You could potentially call it something of a love affair. You have noted that this relationship taught you a lot about life and love, and it was with a cat. I believe we have a picture. If you could tell us a little bit about this story
Oh my
and about some
God.
exciting news that has come from it.
So that's my little furball friend who I affectionately named Not My Cat. So Rob, you got to understand, I'm not a cat person. I don't even like cats.
Your parent probably doesn't either.
I mean, I respect them. I'm very kind to them. I'll say you're cute, but keep it moving because I just don't like the way they have certain habits. Like, they look at you and it takes them like 90 seconds to blink. and they just look at you like you're inferior. And then when they finally blink, they just roll their eyes at you, right? And the jumping on furniture, I just can't live with a cat. And so this cat came to my house while I was gardening, and I ended up feeding it, and it kept coming back. And so, like, over months I kind of got attached to it, but I was very clear, like, I have boundaries in this relationship. You're not living inside my house, but I will set up a nice little space for you, a bed, bowl, all of these things that so you can be comfortable when you come to visit me. And so, over 60,000 people who are on my Facebook page took this journey, and people who don't like cats were like, I don't even like cats, but I feel emotionally invested and connected to this story. And there were bets taken. People thought, oh yeah, she's going to be living with this cat. And so I ended up having to move. I sold my house, and the question was, is she going to take the cat with her, or is she going to leave the cat behind? And there was a huge debate. I mean, it was nasty, fierce debating over this. You have a responsibility to take care of this cat. But ultimately, I got lucky because the new owners have a cat, and so they took the cat in. The cat still comes and goes as she pleases. They send me updates. She's doing well, and as a result of this, like, 8-month reluctant love affair, Simon and Schuster recently, I signed a book deal with them to produce a children's story about the lessons this furball, taught me about life, love, attachment, healing, all of those sorts of things.
That's awesome. I cannot wait to read it. I guarantee you I will have a copy for myself and one for my little free library out front.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Well, thank you again for joining us tonight. This is unfortunately all the time we have, so we'll have to say goodbye to you tonight. I hope we get to talk to you again sometime.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
You are very welcome. And now we're going to send you all over to Paris Whalen with Check This Out.
Welcome, viewers. Here we are at the Check This Out segment, and in an effort to kind of continue the theme of listening to voices of the past and how they understood their realities, we're going to be looking at historical resources available to you online and at UTK libraries that tell stories of the past. So listen closely, UT instructors, researchers, and students. Y'all have a bunch of unique and powerful collections that are rich with historical insight basically at y'all's fingertips. And hopefully after listening today, you're going to feel more inspired than ever to use UT libraries and special collections as you explore the past from different perspectives. So considering our broad topic of cultural interactions and history, where does one even begin to look for historical documentation at the intersection of these subjects, right? Let's quickly kind of just walk through this, right? So y'all probably guessed it. You can head right on over to UTK Library's homepage and scroll down to the section titled Research and Select Research Guides, all right? Now, y'all may remember me talking about research guides in the past, and I only bring them up as often as possible because I use them to kind of orient myself whenever I'm helping students with their research questions during my research chat shifts. So again, research guides are a great place to start exploring a topic, to find help, and most importantly, to save time. So as we've already seen, UT Libraries makes it easy to get started by allowing you to select research guides, and then you can sort by subject. Now, since we're talking about the past, we can choose the broad subject of history. And after selecting history, a bulleted list appears with different guides for this subject. So here your options kind of range from a broad history of cultural identity, like Asian history, or maybe you're looking for something from a more specific perspective, or geographical location, like African Americans in Tennessee, or my final example here, maybe you're curious about our local history here in Knoxville during a specific time period. Well, check out this great guide titled Knoxville History. These are just a few examples of how you can begin exploring both broadly and narrow down your topic as you kind of scroll through our research guides, all right? So once you've selected a guide that kind of piqued your curiosity, we get to the contents of a research guide. And this content can kind of consist of databases, streaming video collections, archival records, and other media that kind of pertain to your topic. So in this case, since it's Women's History Month, I selected women's history materials at special collections, which you're going to hear more about a little bit later. But in this guide, we're going to find links to primary and secondary materials that match this subject. So this specific image on the screen focuses on the digital collections tab on the left that highlights women in our collections. So you don't have to come on campus to view Anna Catherine Wiley's sketches, save your gas, you can view them online. How convenient for the exploratory phase, right? There are more tabs to the left, like videos on the research guide tab that provide links to other research guides with even more materials like women's suffrage and women of the University of Tennessee collections, which are other access points into another perspective in time and in context. So this is where we really get to see the beauty of research guides, as they can kind of help you connect two topics and dig deeper into specific identities to possibly lift underrepresented voices of the past, all right? So in this final image, I've actually left the Women's Suffrage Guide and selected U.S. History, the 19th Century and Civil War Guide from the History Bulleted Research Guide list. I clicked on the Databases tab basically to show you that you can access subject-specific databases that have descriptions of the materials it contains right there in the research guide. So this is perfect for coursework and research, So as y'all can see, this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to exploring historical topics from various perspectives. But hopefully this motivates you to use the UTK Library's resources to breathe life into the stories that you find and share them accurately in the present, all right? And remember, if y'all need help, you can always contact your subject librarian. We are all here to help you, all right? So this wraps up our Check This Out segment. Thanks for joining me. Coming up next, we have Stories from the Stacks with Sarah Johnson.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Stories from the Stacks. Tonight, we have the wonderful Holly Mercer with us. Holly has joined the University of Tennessee, Knoxville in 2012, and currently is our Senior Associate Dean and Professor in the UT Libraries. Her work history includes positions at Stanford, University of Kansas, and Texas A&M. She believes libraries are central to learning and innovation, that research libraries can accomplish more through collaboration, and that openness and integrity in the research process are keys to the future breakthroughs and discoveries. She currently serves as chair of the Board of Governors for HathiTrust, a non-for-profit collaborative of academic and research libraries preserving 17 plus million digitized items. And Holly holds a bachelor's degree in classical studies from Duke and a master's in library and information science from the University of South Carolina. Big warm welcome to Holly Mercer.
Hi, thanks.
Thanks for being here. So UT Libraries has recently acquired a fabulous collection, the complete personal archive of the internationally renowned modernist painter, Beauford Delaney. And we get to learn about what all goes into acquiring a collection like this. And I'm so excited. So let's start off with some background information. Who is Beauford Delaney? And why is the acquisition of his collection significant to UT Libraries and the wider Knoxville area?
Yeah, I'm very excited to be able to talk to you about it. Beauford Delaney is a native of Knoxville. He was born here in 1901. And in Paris's segment, she mentioned the artist Catherine Wiley, who was mentored by Lloyd Branson, who was Knoxville's first full-time professional artist. Lloyd Branson also took Beauford under his wing and mentored and encouraged him to explore his talents. He did the same thing for Beauford's brother, Joseph. So Beauford developed as an artist. By 1929, he had settled in New York, and he was a member of the Harlem Renaissance and one of the leading modernist painters of his time, a real force in the 20th century art world in terms of his abstract and expressionist paintings. He was known for his portraits and also his depictions of scenes just from city life. And he also did some more free form abstract works. The Beauford Delaney collection is greater in both size and importance than any other Beauford Delaney collection that's available in a library or archive. An example of another collection is the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. That's part of the New York Public Library. The collection that we now have richly documents Delaney's work, his life. It contains correspondence with about 140 different people, including James Baldwin, Georgia O'Keeffe, Henry Miller, Al Hirschfeld, and many more. The collection has loose sketches, family, childhood photos, photographs with James Baldwin and other friends of Delaney, and sketchbooks. There were early depictions of, or preliminary studies of works that later became some of his major paintings, and what for those who are far less talented, what I would call doodles. So Beauford's brother, Joseph Delaney, was also an artist. And Joseph served briefly as an artist in residence here at UT Knoxville. And his collections, or many of his collections, are available at UT's Ewing Art Gallery. It includes paintings, archival materials, sketchbooks, drawings. So then the Knoxville Museum of Art holds several works of Beauford Delaney, and the Beck Cultural Exchange Center here in Knoxville is creating a museum to document and honor the Delaney family. So this collection, this acquisition of the Beauford Delaney collection really establishes Knoxville, Tennessee as the place to study the life and the legacy of Beauford Delaney.
Wow. One, that's just like an incredible opportunity to be able to have that as part of, you know, our history here at UT and in Knoxville. And just what, I mean, there are so many opportunities for the future to come, and that's pretty cool. And, you know, so you've already mentioned multiple things that are in this kind of archive, and, you know, it's a lot going into just this one thing that he, you know, personal collection. What exactly did the process look like for acquiring this specific collection?
So it's a long and interesting story, and we don't have time for the entire story, but I'm going to start in 2014 when the Beauford Delaney archive or collection was moved to be stored at the Knoxville Museum of Art. And at that time, Chris Bronstad, who is the modern political archivist in special collections at UT Knoxville, performed an archival assessment of the Delaney archive. And what that really entailed was creating a general index and description of the collection. And I am going to read the conclusion of Chris Bronstad's assessment, her summary statement, because I think it really encapsulates why this collection is so important and why we're so happy that it is going to be preserved here. Given the extent of these materials and the diverse and important world they document, this would be an exciting collection for any repository to accept. It gives context and depth to the vital but underdocumented intersections of African American, LGBT, artistic, expatriate identities and cultures. But this is an especially amazing collection for our university, as it shows how these important cultural moments and intersections have a direct connection to our own local Knoxville history. So meanwhile, the court-appointed administrator for the Beauford Delaney estate was working to settle the affairs of the estate. And the UT libraries began in earnest looking at acquiring the collection in 2020. So that was quite a few years had passed. And with the generous support of donors, we were able to purchase the collection earlier this year.
Wow. Chris is, she's very articulate. I feel like that was wonderful. And it also feels like kind of like a meant to be type situation. Clearly, you know, hard work and generous donations made it possible, but, you know, maybe Beauford Delaney was always supposed to come back home to Knoxville. I'd like to think anyways. So now I know that we're all super excited to view these artifacts, but the collection isn't quite available yet. What are some next steps for the collection?
So in archival terms, the collection needs to be processed, arranged, and described. But really what that means is that we need to have some time to assess the condition of everything in the collection. We might need to stabilize some materials because they're very fragile. They've been through a lot over the decades. It might be simple things like removing paper clips and rubber bands, but after those things are done, everything needs to be rehoused and arranged in a way that makes sense. And then finally, the curators will describe every single item. So they'll go through item by item and describe everything in the collection. And what this will do is help researchers know what's in the collection, and it will help special collections staff know where the materials are located within the collection. So as you can imagine, for something this size, it is going to be a lengthy, laborious process, and yet I think it would be really fascinating and fun work too. And I'm just a little bit envious of those who get to spend that much time exploring and learning about this collection.
I'm right there with you. I would totally be in a room just looking at all of this. I'd probably have a harder time processing it because I would just be in awe of everything. But thank you so much. That explains a whole lot. This conversation's been super eye-opening. I've definitely learned more than I ever thought I could learn in a short few minutes about acquiring a collection and one as significant as this. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate the time that you've given to us tonight.
I enjoyed it. Thanks.
Bye. So while we wait on this beautiful collection to become available to us, there is so much more to be explored in the archives already. So I encourage you to take some time and visit the Betsy B. Creekmore Special Collections and University Archives here at Hodges Library. And that's it for Stories from the Stacks. See you next time.
All right. That is it for another show. The final episode of season 2 will be on April 21st. Same time, same channel. We'd also like to take a minute to invite you to 2 upcoming in-person events. That's right, other human beings in the flesh. Local spoken word performer and hip-hop artist Black Atticus will perform at John C. Hodges Library on Thursday, March 31st, 2022. You can register to attend that event at tiny.utk.edu/boundless22. You can also join us on Tuesday, April 5th from 5:30 p.m. to 7 p.m. for a lecture and book signing with geologist and Professor Emeritus Robert D. Hatcher Jr. and author John E. Ross. Find out more about both of these events at lib.utk.edu. See y'all next time. Have a good night.